They say the sky is the limit, but for Captain Richard Sterling, the sky was his personal kingdom, and he didn't like trespassers. He looked at the woman in seat 1A, impeccably dressed, silent and black, and saw only one thing, an error. He thought he had the power to humiliate her. He thought he could send her back to row 34 without consequence. He was wrong. He didn't know that while he flew the plane, she owned the ink on his paycheck. This isn't just a story about a seat assignment. This is what happens when arrogance meets the one woman who has the power to ground you forever. The rain was hammering against the reinforced glass of JFK's Terminal 4, turning the runway lights into smeared streaks of red and gold. Inside the cabin of Flight 882 to London Heathrow, the air smelled of conditioned leather and that specific sterile scent of recycled oxygen. Dr. Vivian Cross adjusted the sleeves of her charcoal blazer. It was a Saint Laurent piece, understated vintage, the kind of expensive that doesn't scream for attention, but commands it. She was exhausted. The merger with Ascendia Global Airlines had taken 6 months of sleepless nights, endless Zoom calls with lawyers in Zurich, and a final brutal 48-hour negotiation session in a Manhattan boardroom that smelled of stale coffee and fear. She had secured the deal at 4:00 a.m. By 6:00 a.m. she was in a car to the airport. She hadn't told anyone yet. The ink was barely dry. Technically, the press release wouldn't drop for another 8 hours. For now, she just wanted to sleep. She sank into seat 1A, the prime spot in the first-class cabin, and closed her eyes. "Excuse me." The voice was deep-clipped and laced with an irritation that felt practiced. Vivian didn't open her eyes immediately. She assumed it was a passenger looking for overhead bin space. "Ma'am, I'm speaking to you." Vivian opened her eyes. Standing over her wasn't a flight attendant. It was the pilot. Captain Richard Sterling was a man who looked like he had been cast in a movie about pilots 30 years ago and never broke character. Silver hair gelled into a helmet, a jawline that had softened with too many steak dinners, and 4 gold stripes on his shoulder epaulets that he seemed to think were granted by divine right. He was holding a manifest clipboard, tapping it against his thigh. "Can I help you, Captain?" Vivian asked, her voice calm, though her throat was scratchy from fatigue. "I think you're a little lost," Sterling said. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her shoes, then her bag, then the space above her head. "This is first class. The crew rest area is in the back, and economy boarding hasn't started for Group 4 yet." Vivian blinked. The assumption was so blunt, so archaic, it took her a second to process it. "I'm not crew captain, and I'm certainly not Group 4. Sterling let out a short, sharp breath through his nose, a laugh that wasn't a laugh. "Look, we're running a tight schedule. I don't have time for the ground staff's screw-ups. Did someone upgrade you a boyfriend at the gate? Because I don't see a cross on my VIP list for 1A. He glanced at the clipboard. 1A, reserved for chairman's guest. Technically, she was the chairman now, or at least the majority power behind him. But Sterling didn't know that. "My ticket is for seat 1A, Vivian said, reaching for her phone to pull up the boarding pass. "If you check with the gate agent—" "I don't need to check with the gate agent." Sterling snapped his voice, rising enough that the couple in 2B and 2C, an elderly pair of tourists named the Harringtons, looked up from their complimentary champagne. "I know this flight. I know who flies in my front cabin. And usually when there's a system error, it's because someone slipped through the cracks." He leaned down, invading her personal space. The smell of strong mints and stale tobacco clung to him. This seat is reserved for high-value priority passengers, corporate partners. Not, he waved a hand vaguely at her attire. Commuters, I need you to grab your bag and head back to coach. I'll have the steward find you a seat where you'll be more comfortable. Row 34 has extra legroom, I think. Vivian sat up straighter. The fatigue evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Captain Sterling, is it? She read his badge. I paid full fare for this seat. I am not moving. Sterling's face went a shade of red that clashed with his uniform. He wasn't used to no. He was used to yes, Captain, and right away, Captain. Listen to me, Sterling hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. I am the captain of this vessel. Under federal aviation law, I have the right to remove any passenger who disturbs the peace or refuses crew instructions. You are refusing an instruction. I am refusing an unlawful order based on bias, Vivian countered smoothly. You have no valid reason to move me other than your own prejudice. Prejudice, Sterling scoffed loudly. Don't play that card with me. This is about protocol. You don't belong here. Now move, or I will have security drag you off this plane in front of everyone. Is that what you want, a scene? The cabin had gone dead silent. The Harringtons were watching with wide eyes. A young tech CEO in seat 3A took off his noise-cancelling headphones. Vivian looked Sterling dead in the eye. You want a scene, Captain, be very careful. You might get a tragedy. The tension in the first-class cabin was thick enough to choke on. A flight attendant, Sarah Jenkins, rushed over from the galley. She was young, barely 25, and looked terrified. She had seen Sterling in moods like this before, usually when his coffee wasn't hot enough or the tarmac delay was 5 minutes too long. But she had never seen him target a passenger this aggressively. Captain, is there a problem? Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. Yes, Miss Jenkins, there is, Sterling barked, not looking away from Vivian. We have a seating duplicate. This passenger is refusing to vacate a seat reserved for a corporate VIP. Escort her to economy. Now. Sarah looked at Vivian, then at the tablet in her hand. But, Captain, the manifest on my iPad shows Ms. Cross in 1A. It's confirmed. Full fare. Platinum status. Sterling snatched the iPad from her hands. He didn't even look at the screen before turning it off and shoving it back at her. The system is glitching. I got a memo this morning about overbooking errors. Look at her, Sarah. Does she look like a corporate VIP to you? Sarah froze. She looked at Vivian's calm, steely expression. She looked at the diamond studs in Vivian's ears, small but flawless. She realized exactly what was happening. She looks like a passenger with a valid ticket, Captain, Sarah said quietly. It was the bravest thing she had ever done in her 3 years at Ascendia Global. Sterling's eyes bulged. Excuse me. Are you questioning my authority too? Do you want to be written up for insubordination before we even push back? I can replace you just as easily as I can move her. He turned back to Vivian, his patience officially incinerated. Last chance, Sterling said, pointing a thick finger at the aisle. Get up, go to row 34, or get off my plane. Vivian didn't move. She didn't scream. She picked up her phone. Who are you calling? Sterling sneered. Your lawyer, customer service, let me save you the time they don't care. On this plane, I am God. I'm not calling a lawyer, Vivian said, unlocking her screen. I'm checking the stock price. The stock price? Sterling laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Lady, you're delusional. Vivian tapped the screen, her fingers moving with precision. Ascendia Global, ticker symbol ASG, currently trading at $42.50 a share. It's been stagnant for 3 years. Mismanagement, poor customer satisfaction ratings, a bloated executive structure. She looked up at him. And a pilot roster that has too many liabilities. Sterling grabbed the armrest of her seat, leaning in so close she could feel the heat radiating off him. That is it. You are threatening a crew member. That is a federal offense. He turned to the cabin door. Gate agent, get security down here, now. The commotion finally broke the dam of the other passengers. Hey. The man in 3A, the tech CEO named Jason Meyer, stood up. He was wearing a hoodie that probably cost more than Sterling's car. This is insane, man. She's got a ticket. Sit down and fly the plane. Stay out of this, sir, Sterling shouted, spinning around. Unless you want to join her on the no-fly list. You're the one making a scene, Mrs. Harrington piped up from 2B, clutching her pearls. The poor woman hasn't done anything. She is trespassing. Sterling roared. The mask of professionalism had completely slipped. This wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about his ego. He had challenged a black woman, and she hadn't immediately submitted. In his world, that was an insult that required punishment. 2 Port Authority officers, led by a tired-looking TSA supervisor named Officer Miller, squeezed through the cabin door. What seems to be the problem here, Captain? Miller asked, hand resting on his belt. Disruptive passenger, Sterling said, straightening his tie and putting on his command voice. She is refusing crew instructions, acting belligerent, and making threats against the airline. I want her removed immediately. Officer Miller looked at Vivian. She was still sitting calmly, legs crossed, phone in hand. She looked about as belligerent as a library. Ma'am, Miller asked cautiously. Vivian stood up slowly. She was tall, nearly eye level with the officer. Officer, she said, her voice projecting clearly to the back of the cabin. I have a valid ticket. I have been harassed by this pilot since I sat down. I have been hastily profiled, threatened, and verbally abused. I am willing to deplane, but I want it on the record that I am doing so under duress. We don't need a speech, Sterling interrupted. Just get her off. Vivian turned to Sterling. Her eyes were cold fire. I will get off, Captain. But remember this moment. You are worried about who is sitting in seat 1A. You should be worried about who is sitting in the boardroom. Get out, Sterling spat. Vivian picked up her bag. She didn't look back at the sympathetic passengers. She walked past Sarah, who was wiping tears from her eyes. I'm so sorry, Mum, Sarah whispered. Vivian paused and looked at the young flight attendant. What is your full name? Sarah. Sarah Jenkins. Don't worry, Sarah, Vivian said softly. You did your job. You'll be fine. She walked off the jet bridge and back into the terminal. As she walked, she dialed a number on her phone. It was a private line, a number only 5 people in the world had. Hello, a voice answered. It was Preston Galloway, the current CEO of Ascendia Global. Preston, Vivian said, her voice clipping along like a metronome. It's Vivian Cross. Vivian, my God, we weren't expecting to hear from you until the announcement tomorrow. Are you on your way to London? I was, Vivian said, watching the plane pull away from the gate through the rain-streaked window. But there's been a change of plans. I need you to call an emergency board meeting. Immediately. An emergency meeting? Why is the deal off? Preston sounded panicked. No, Vivian said, turning to walk toward the VIP lounge. The deal is solid, but I'm going to need to make my first executive decision as majority shareholder a little earlier than expected. pull the personnel file for a Captain Richard Sterling. And Preston? Yes. Make sure the legal team is there. I'm going to clean house. While Vivian Cross was making calls that would shake the foundations of Wall Street, Captain Richard Sterling was cruising at 37,000 feet, somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. The cockpit was dark, save for the glow of the instrument panels and the stars stretching out infinitely above them. Sterling felt good. He felt righteous. "Did you see the look on her face?" Sterling chuckled, taking a sip of his coffee. "Like she owned the place. It's unbelievable. These people buy a discounted ticket on some third-party app and think they're royalty." First Officer Mark Danvers, a sharp pilot in his early 30s, stared straight ahead at the horizon line. He kept his hands near the yoke, his knuckles white. He hadn't said a word since takeoff. "You're quiet, Mark," Sterling said, glancing over. "Don't tell me you felt bad for her. You have to maintain standards, son. If you let one rule slide, the whole structure collapses. Broken windows theory. You let a ruffian in first class today. Tomorrow, you've got chaos." Mark finally turned his head. "Captain, she wasn't a ruffian. She was calm, and Sarah showed me the manifest later. She paid $12,000 for that seat. It was a J-class full flex." Sterling waved his hand dismissively. "System error. Or fraud. Probably a stolen credit card. Trust me, I did the airline a favor. Ascendia doesn't need that kind of clientele. We need prestige. We need class." He leaned back, adjusting his headset. "Besides, I'll file a report when we land in Heathrow. Preemptive strike. Passenger was belligerent and threatened crew safety. My word against hers. And I have 4 stripes. She's just some angry woman who got caught, trying to punch above her weight class." Sterling truly believed this. In his 25 years of flying, he had removed drunkards, unruly teenagers, and entitled businessmen. He saw Vivian as just another statistic. He didn't know that while he was flying through the night, the ground beneath him had already shifted. Back in New York, the rain had stopped, but the storm inside the Ascendia Global headquarters was just beginning. Vivian walked into the glass-walled lobby of the Ascendia Tower in Midtown Manhattan. She wasn't wearing the travel blazer anymore. She had stopped at her penthouse, showered and changed into a cream-colored power suit that looked like it was cut from marble. She approached the security desk. "ID, please," the guard said, not looking up. "I don't have an employee badge yet," Vivian said calmly. "My name is Vivian Cross. I'm here to see Preston Galloway." The guard sighed, ready to turn another solicitor away. "Mr. Galloway is in meetings all day. Unless you have an appointment." "I don't need an appointment," Vivian said. "I own the building." The guard looked up, ready to laugh, but the look on Vivian's face stopped him cold. It wasn't anger. It was absolute, terrifying certainty. Before the guard could respond, the elevator banks opened, and Preston Galloway, the CEO, came running out, flanked by 2 assistants. "Vivian," Preston called out, breathless. He looked disheveled. "I came down as soon as security pinged me. I am so sorry about the mix-up at the airport. I heard you didn't make the flight." "I was removed, Preston," Vivian said, her voice echoing in the cavernous lobby. "Kicked off by your Captain Sterling." Preston's face drained of color. He what? He told me to go back to coach. He implied my ticket was fraudulent. He threatened to have me arrested." Vivian began walking toward the elevators, and Preston scrambled to keep up, falling into step half a pace behind her. "It seems Ascendia has a culture problem. I just bought 51% of this company to save it from bankruptcy, and your frontline staff treats high-value customers like criminals." They stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing them in. "I will fire him," Preston said immediately. "I'll draft the termination letter right now. He'll be gone before he lands in London." "No," Vivian said, pressing the button for the boardroom floor. Preston blinked. "No. If you fire him via email, he becomes a victim. He'll go to the union. He'll say he was following protocol. He'll sue for wrongful termination." Vivian turned to face the CEO. Her eyes were hard. "I don't just want him fired, Preston. I want him exposed. I want him to understand exactly who he disrespected. I want to see the moment he realizes that his God complex has no power over me." "So what do we do?" Preston asked. "Let him fly the return leg," Vivian said. "Bring him back to New York, and when he lands, summon him to the boardroom. Tell him it's a performance review regarding the incident. Tell him there's a VIP passenger who wants to commend him for his vigilance." Preston swallowed hard. "You want to trap him?" "He trapped himself," Vivian corrected. "I'm just closing the door." 2 days later, Flight 883 from London Heathrow touched down at JFK. It was a smooth landing, the kind pilots pride themselves on. Buttering the bread, they called it. Captain Sterling taxied the massive Boeing 777 to the gate. He felt refreshed. He had spent his layover in London at a nice pub, eating fish and chips, laughing with the other senior pilots about the crazy woman in 1A. He had convinced himself that he was the hero of the story. As the engine spooled down the flight deck, printer whirred to life. It was a message from flight operations. "Capt. Sterling, report to HQ immediately upon arrival. Mandatory debrief regarding Flight 882. Incident. CEO requested." CEO requested. First Officer Danvers read over his shoulder, eyebrows raised. "That's heavy, Rick. Usually it's just the chief pilot." Sterling grinned, unbuckling his harness. "Don't you get it, Mark? The CEO knows I protected the brand. This isn't a reprimand, it's a pat on the back. They probably want to use my report as a case study for security protocols." He stood up, grabbing his hat and jacket. "You head home, Mark. I'm going to go collect my accolades." Sterling walked through the terminal with his chest puffed out. He bypassed the crew bus and hailed a cab straight to the Ascendia Tower. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. Silver hair, perfect tie, straight epaulets shining. He looked every inch the veteran aviator. When he arrived at the headquarters, the atmosphere was strange. Usually the receptionists would smile and wave at the pilots. Today the lobby was quiet. People seemed to be whispering. Sterling ignored it. He went to the top floor to the executive suite. Outside the boardroom double doors, he found Sarah Jenkins, the flight attendant from the incident. She was sitting on a bench, twisting her hands in her lap. She looked pale. "Well, look who it is," Sterling boomed his voice, filling the waiting area. "Here to corroborate my story, Jenkins." "Good girl. Just tell the truth that she was agitated and refusing orders. Stick to the script and I'll make sure the chief pilot knows you're a team player." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and pity. "Captain, I don't think that's what this is." "Nonsense," Sterling scoffed. "You worry too much. That's why you're still working economy. You lack the killer instinct." The heavy oak doors opened. A legal aide in a sharp grey suit stepped out. "Captain Sterling, they're ready for you." Sterling buttoned his blazer. He gave Sarah a wink. "Watch and learn, kid." He strode into the boardroom like he owned it. It was a massive room, dominated by a 30-foot mahogany table. At the far end, sat Preston Galloway, the CEO. Flanking him were 3 corporate lawyers and the head of HR, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable. But there was one chair turned away from the table facing the window that overlooked the Manhattan skyline, a high-backed leather chair. "Captain Sterling," Preston said, his voice unusually formal. "Please take a seat." Sterling sat at the opposite end of the table. He placed his hat on the table, lining it up perfectly with the edge. "Good afternoon, Mr. Galloway," Sterling said, projecting confidence. "I assume this is about the incident on Flight 882. I have my written report here. As I stated, the passenger was non-compliant, and I made a command decision to prioritize the safety and comfort of the first-class cabin." "Safety and comfort," Preston repeated, looking down at a file. "You claimed the passenger was a security risk, potential risk," Sterling corrected. "She was erratic, and honestly, sir, she didn't fit the profile. We have to be vigilant. Fraudulent upgrades are up 20% this year. I was protecting revenue." "Protecting revenue?" A voice came from the chair facing the window. Sterling froze. The voice was familiar. Smooth alto and cold as ice. The chair slowly swiveled around. Dr. Vivienne Cross sat there. She was holding a dossier in her lap. She looked at Sterling with a gaze that could peel paint off a wall. "You," Sterling blurted out. He looked at Preston, then back to her. "What is she doing here, Mr. Galloway? This is the passenger. Why is she in a secure board meeting?" Sterling stood up, his face reddening. "This is highly irregular. I will not be cross-examined by a disruptive passenger. If she has a complaint, she can file it with customer relations like everyone else." "Sit down, Richard," Preston said quietly. "No, I will not sit down." Sterling's arrogance surged. "This is a mockery of my authority. I am a senior captain. I demand to know why this woman is allowed in the executive boardroom." Vivian placed the dossier on the table. The sound was soft, but it echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "Mr. Galloway," Vivian said, never breaking eye contact with Sterling, "would you please introduce me to your employee?" Preston cleared his throat. He looked at Sterling with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Captain Sterling," Preston said, "I would like to introduce you to Dr. Vivienne Cross. As of 48 hours ago, Dr. Cross's private equity firm acquired a majority stake in Ascendia Global." Sterling's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His brain tried to process the words, but they jammed together. Majority stake. Equity firm. "She is the new chairwoman of the board," Preston continued. "She owns the airline captain. She owns the plane you flew. She owns the fuel. And she owns the seat you kicked her out of." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Sterling sank slowly back into his chair. His face went from red to a sickly ash grey. The confidence, the bravado, the 4 stripes armor, it all evaporated. He looked small. "I..." Sterling stammered. I didn't know." "You didn't know," Vivian repeated. She stood up and began to walk slowly down the length of the long table. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. "That is the problem, Captain," she said softly. "You assumed. You looked at me, and you saw a problem. You saw someone who didn't belong. You didn't check my ticket. You didn't check the manifest properly. You didn't listen to your flight attendant, Sarah, who tried to warn you." She stopped right next to him. She leaned down, just as he had leaned down to her on the plane. But this time the power dynamic was reversed. "You said I was trespassing in your kingdom," Vivian whispered. But you forgot that kings answer to emperors, and I am the emperor here. Miss Cross, Dr. Cross. Sterling tried to rally his voice, shaking. It was a misunderstanding. The lighting was bad. I was under stress. We can fix this. I can apologize. I'll write a formal apology. An apology. Vivian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. She walked back to the head of the table and turned to the lawyers. Mr. Sterling thinks an apology fixes racial profiling and gross negligence. She picked up a remote control and pointed it at the screen on the wall. A video started playing. It was footage from a passenger's phone, Jason Meyer, the tech CEO in seat 3A. The video showed Sterling looming over Vivian, his face twisted in anger, shouting, "On this plane, I am God." "We found this on Twitter," Vivian said. "It has 4 million views. The hashtag boycott Ascendia is trending #1 worldwide. Our stock dropped foot this morning before I managed to stabilize it." She turned back to Sterling. "You didn't just insult me, Richard. You damaged my asset. You cost me money, and I don't like losing money." Sterling looked at the video, then at Preston. "Preston, please. I've been with this company for 20 years. I have a pension. I have a family. And that is why I'm not just firing you," Vivian said. Sterling looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. You're not. No." Vivian smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Firing you is too easy. If I fire you, you go to another airline. You tell them you were a victim of woke politics. You keep your pension. You keep your pride." She sat down in the chairman's seat. "I have reviewed your contract, Captain. There is a clause regarding conduct unbecoming of an officer and gross negligence causing reputational harm. Because of the viral nature of your outburst, we are activating the morality clause in your contract." The lawyer to her right slid a piece of paper across the table toward Sterling. "This is a notice of immediate termination for cause," the lawyer said. "This means you are stripped of your seniority, you are stripped of your severance package, and we are freezing your pension pending a legal review of damages caused to the brand." Sterling's hands shook as he picked up the paper. You can't take my pension. That's my life savings." "You took my dignity," Vivian said coldly. "I'm just balancing the books." "But I'll never fly again," Sterling shouted, tears forming in his eyes. "If you terminate me for cause, no major carrier will touch me. I'll be blacklisted." "You should have thought about that before you told the owner of the company to go to row 34, Vivian said. She wasn't done. "However," Vivian continued, leaning forward, "I am a businesswoman. I believe in the second chances, if they are earned. I am willing to offer you a deal to save a portion of your pension." Sterling looked desperate. "Anything. I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. I'll do sensitivity training." "I don't want your apologies, Captain," Vivian said. "I want you to understand what it feels like to be dismissed, to be looked down upon." She slid a second piece of paper across the table. "Ascendia Ground Services is hiring. We have an opening for a junior baggage handler in the tarmac division. It pays minimum wage. It involves heavy lifting, rain or shine. No seniority. No first-class meals." Sterling stared at the paper in horror. "You want me? To throw bags, I'm a captain." "Not anymore," Vivian said. "If you accept this position and work it for 6 months without a single complaint, without a single instance of arrogance, I will release your pension funds. If you refuse, we go to court. I sue you for the stock drop damages, and I leave you with nothing but the shirt on your back." She checked her watch. "You have 1 minute to decide, Mr. Sterling. The view from the tarmac is quite different from the cockpit. I suggest you learn to appreciate it. November on the tarmac at JFK is a special kind of hell. The wind whips off Jamaica Bay, cutting through layers of clothing like a knife, and the smell of jet fuel is inescapable. Richard Sterling, formerly Captain Sterling, yanked on the zipper of his neon yellow safety vest. It was tight around the middle. He wasn't used to physical labor. For 2 decades, his heaviest lift had been his flight kit. Now he was staring down the barrel of a belt loader, packed with 50-pound suitcases from a flight arriving from Tokyo. "Yo, Richie." "Yo, move it. We got a 20-minute turn." The shout came from Big Mike, the shift supervisor. Mike was 24 years old, half Sterling's age, and he ran the ramp with an iron fist. He didn't care about Sterling's past. To him, Sterling was just the slow, new guy who complained about his back. I'm moving. Sterling grunted, grabbing a heavy, hard-shell suitcase. His knuckles were raw and cracked from the cold. His back screamed in protest. It had been 3 months, 90 days of waking up at 4 a.m., not to command a vessel but to drive a tug. 90 days of being invisible. When he was a pilot, ground crew would wave at him, and he would barely nod back. Now he was one of them. He saw how the pilots looked at him from the cockpit windows, if they looked at all. They looked right through him. He was just part of the machinery. As he tossed the bag onto the cart, a shadow fell over him. A massive Boeing 777 was pulling into the neighboring gate. It was Flight 882 to London, his old flight. Sterling paused, wiping sweat mixed with freezing rain from his forehead. He watched the pilots in the cockpit, running their checklists. He could see the gold stripes on their shoulders. The window slid open. The captain looked down to check the jet bridge alignment. Sterling froze. The captain was Mark Danvers, his old first officer. The man Sterling had lectured about standards and riffraff. Mark was sitting in the left seat now. He had his command. Mark's eyes scanned the ramp and locked on to Sterling. For a moment, time stopped. Sterling standing in the rain in a dirty reflective vest, holding a stranger's luggage. Mark warm and dry in the cockpit, wearing the uniform Sterling had disgraced. Mark didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just looked at Sterling with a somber, pitying expression, then slid the window shut and turned away. The shame hit Sterling harder than the cold. He dropped the bag he was holding. "Hey, watch the handle, Richie," Big Mike yelled. "You break it. You buy it." "I need a minute," Sterling wheezed, leaning against the tug. "You don't get a minute," Mike said, walking over. "You think you're special. You think because you used to fly these things, you're better than us. You ain't. You're just a guy moving bags. Now get back to work or I write you up. One write-up and you know the deal. The lady upstairs said 0 tolerance. The lady upstairs. Dr. Vivienne Cross. She was watching. Sterling knew it. Every week a report went to her desk. He had thought about quitting 100 times. He had thought about suing. But he knew she had the best lawyers in New York, and deep down in a place he hated to visit, he knew he deserved this. He looked at the bag in front of him. It had a priority tag on it. Ascendia Gold member. He remembered kicking Vivian out of her seat. He remembered the look on her face, not anger, but resolve. Sterling picked up the bag. He didn't throw it. He placed it carefully on the cart. Then he grabbed the next one. And the next one. He kept his head down. He did the work. For the first time in his life, Richard Sterling wasn't flying above the world. He was carrying the weight of it. The rain at JFK didn't fall. It attacked. It came in sideways sheets, driven by a biting Atlantic wind that found its way through every seam of waterproof gear. Richard Sterling, formerly the senior-most captain of the Ascendia fleet, was currently wrestling with the latch of a cargo container on the tarmac of Gate B-42. His knuckles were raw, split open by the cold and the constant friction of handling heavy luggage. His back, once accustomed to the ergonomic embrace of a cockpit seat, throbbed with a dull, constant ache that had become his only companion over the last 6 months. "Yo, Captain, let's go. We got a tight turn on this bird." The voice belonged to Big Mike, the ramp supervisor. Mike was 24, built like a linebacker, and had zero respect for Sterling's past life. To Mike, Sterling was just the old guy who had been dumped on his shift by corporate, a liability he had to watch. "Almost got it," Sterling gritted out the wind, snatching his words away. He threw his weight against the rusted latch. With a metallic groan, it gave way. Sterling didn't celebrate. He immediately began hauling bags onto the belt loader. He didn't check the tags for destinations anymore. He checked them for fragility. He checked them for heavy stickers to spare his spine. 6 months, 180 days. When Vivian Cross had banished him to the tarmac, Sterling had thought it was a joke. Then he thought it was a lawsuit waiting to happen. Then about 2 weeks in, while vomiting in a porta potty from exhaustion, he realized it was a prison. But something strange had happened around month 4. He was loading a crate that contained a dog, a golden retriever scared, whining in its kennel. The old Sterling, the captain. Sterling would have been annoyed by the noise disrupting his pre-flight checks. But the tarmac Sterling knelt down in the freezing rain. He took off his glove and put his fingers through the wire mesh. "It's okay, buddy," he had whispered, ignoring the water running down his neck. "I got you. You're safe." He stayed there for 10 minutes until the dog calmed down, risking a write-up from Mike. He made sure the crate was secured perfectly, double-checking the straps, ensuring the animal wouldn't slide during takeoff. As he watched the plane taxi away, he realized that for 20 years he had been responsible for lives, but he had never actually cared about them. He had cared about the schedule. He had cared about the altitude. "Sterling," Big Mike's voice cut through his memory. "Leave the rest. You're wanted inside." Sterling froze, holding a black Samsonite suitcase against his chest. He looked up. Mike was standing by the tug, holding a radio. His expression was unreadable. "Inside?" Sterling asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah. Operations. They said to clock out. Suit up. You're going to the tower." The tower. The headquarters. Sterling felt a cold pit open in his stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. His 6 months were up. Today was the verdict. He finished loading the bag gently. He didn't throw it. He placed it. Then he nodded to Mike. "Thanks, Mike." "For what?" Mike spat, lighting a cigarette shielded by his hand. "You're slow as hell, Richie." "For not taking it easy on me," Sterling said. Mike paused, looking at the older man. The arrogance that had dripped off Sterling 6 months ago was gone, washed away by jet fuel and humility. "Good luck up there, Captain," Mike muttered, turning away. "Don't let him eat you alive." The transition from the tarmac to the corporate headquarters was jarring. Sterling showered in the locker room, scrubbing the grease from his fingernails with a harsh, abrasive soap that smelled of industrial lemon. He changed into the suit he had brought with him in a garment bag. It was an off-the-rack charcoal suit, slightly loose now. He had lost nearly 25 pounds. His neck, once thick with the good life of steak dinners and sedentary flying was slender. His face was weathered ruddier lines, etched deep around his eyes from squinting into the sun and rain. He walked through the gleaming glass lobby of Ascendia Tower. 6 months ago, he had walked through here like a conquering hero. He had expected salutes. Now he kept his head down. He passed a group of pilots waiting for the elevator. He knew 2 of them, Captain Harris and First Officer Lewis. They had flown together to Dubai a year ago. Sterling instinctively started to lift his hand to wave, then stopped. Harris looked at him. There was a moment of recognition, and then brutal and swift, Harris looked away. He turned his back, engaging Lewis in a loud conversation about golf. Sterling lowered his hand. He was a ghost. He was the cautionary tale. Don't mess up or you'll end up like Sterling. He rode the elevator to the executive floor alone. The silence in the lift was deafening. He watched the numbers climb 30, 40, 50. Every floor took him further away from the reality he had just lived and closer to the woman who held his life in her hands. Dr. Vivienne Cross. He remembered her face perfectly. The calm, terrifying intelligence in her eyes. The way she had dismantled his entire existence without raising her voice. He had hated her for months. He had cursed her name every time his alarm went off at 3:00 a.m. But now he just felt a strange, hollow dread. He didn't want his job back. He didn't want the power. He just wanted to survive. The elevator doors opened. The executive receptionist, a young woman who looked like she was made of porcelain and efficiency, didn't smile. "Mr. Sterling, they are waiting for you in boardroom A." "Thank you," Sterling said softly. He walked down the long corridor. The carpet was so thick it felt like walking on sand. He reached the double mahogany doors. He took a breath, adjusted his tie. A nervous tick he hadn't lost, and pushed them open. The room was exactly as he remembered, yet entirely different. The last time he was here, he had sat with his chest puffed out, demanding respect. Now he felt like he was entering a courtroom to hear a death sentence. Preston Galloway, the CEO, sat at the right hand of the head of the table. The head of HR, Mrs. Gable, was on the left, and at the head, framed by the panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline that Sterling used to look down on, from the sky sat Vivienne Cross. She was wearing a navy suit, sharp and architectural. Her hair was pulled back. Her reading glasses were perched on the end of her nose as she reviewed a file. She didn't look up when he entered. "Sit," she said. Sterling sat. He didn't take the chair at the opposite end of the table, the confrontation chair. He took the chair along the side, a humble position. He folded his hands on the table. They were shaking slightly. He clamped them together. Vivienne closed the file. The sound was a soft thud. She took off her glasses and looked at him. Her gaze was clinical. She was dissecting him. She looked at his frayed cuffs. She looked at the windburn on his cheeks. She looked at his hands, the cuts, the calluses, the grease stain under his thumbnail that he hadn't been able to scrub out. "Report," she said. Sterling cleared his throat. It felt dry as dust. "Report, ma'am." "Tell me about your time in ground services," she said, her voice neutral. "Did you find the work beneath you?" Sterling looked at Preston, then back to Vivienne. This was the trap. If he complained, he was arrogant. If he lied and said he loved it, he was a sycophant. "It was hard," Sterling said honestly. "Physically, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. My back gave out 3 times in the first month. I lost a fingernail in a belt loader." "And," Vivienne pressed. "And it was honest," Sterling said. He looked down at the table. I spent 20 years sitting in a cockpit, complaining if my coffee was lukewarm. Down there, the guys I worked with, Big Mike, Hernandez, Sarah, they work 12-hour shifts in freezing rain for $16 an hour, and they don't complain. They just get the job done, because if they don't, the plane doesn't leave. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I thought I flew the plane, Dr. Cross. I realized that they fly the plane. I just steer it. Preston Galloway raised an eyebrow. He looked impressed. But Vivian didn't blink. Very poetic, Mr. Sterling. But humility is easy to fake when you're desperate for a paycheck. She opened the folder again. I have a report here from last week. A delayed flight from Miami. You were the lead on the baggage crew. The flight was delayed 40 minutes because of a cargo issue. The pilots were furious. They were screaming at the ground crew from the window. Sterling nodded. He remembered. Yes. Captain Miller. Flight 404. Captain Miller filed a complaint, Vivian said, tapping a paper. He said the ground crew was incompetent and slow. He specifically named you. He said you were dilly-dallying with a crate. Sterling's jaw tightened. I wasn't dilly-dallying. Then what were you doing? Vivian asked, her voice sharpening. Why did you delay my aircraft, Mr. Sterling? Old habits trying to sabotage the timeline. No, Sterling said firmly. The cargo latch on the forward hold was broken. The locking mechanism was corroded. Captain Miller wanted to push back. He said it was good enough. I refused to sign off on the load sheet. You refused a captain's order. I refused to let an unsafe aircraft leave the gate, Sterling said, his voice rising just a notch, not with anger, but with conviction. If that latch failed at 30,000 feet, the depressurization could have compromised the hydraulics. I told Miller he could scream all he wanted, but that bag wasn't moving until maintenance fixed the latch. The room went silent. Vivian stared at him. For 10 agonizing seconds, she said nothing. Captain Miller, Vivian finally said, is a very senior pilot. He has been with us for 15 years. He claimed you were being insubordinate. Captain Miller was wrong, Sterling said, and if I have to go back to stacking bags for the rest of my life because I kept that plane on the ground, then fine. But I won't apologize for keeping those passengers safe. Not even to you. Sterling braced himself. He had done it again. He had spoken back to the owner. He prepared for the firing squad. Slowly a smile spread across Vivian Cross's face. It wasn't the cold, predatory smile of 6 months ago. It was genuine. It was satisfied. Preston, Vivian said, not looking away from Sterling. Read the maintenance report. Preston Galloway cleared his throat and picked up a separate sheet of paper. Post-flight inspection of Flight 404 confirmed a structural failure in the forward cargo latch. Maintenance stated that if the aircraft had departed, catastrophic failure was highly probable. Mr. Sterling's refusal to release the aircraft likely prevented a critical in-flight emergency. Sterling slumped back in his chair. The air left his lungs in a rush. You didn't just move bags, Richard, Vivian said softly. You protected the house. She stood up. She walked around the table, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She stopped next to him. 6 months ago, she said, I looked at you and saw a liability. I saw a man who thought his uniform made him a god. I saw a man who would kick a woman out of her seat because her existence offended his ego. She placed a hand on the back of his chair. Today I see a man who understands that the most important part of the job isn't the prestige, it's the responsibility. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. She slid it onto the table in front of him. "Your pension," she said. Sterling stared at the envelope. You're releasing it. Fully reinstated Somu," she said. "Plus interest. You earned it. You completed the terms of our agreement." Sterling reached out and touched the envelope. It was his life. It was his retirement. He could walk away. He could go to Florida by a boat and never look at an airport again. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Dr. Cross." He started to stand up. I suppose I should go clear out my locker." "Sit down, Richard," Vivian commanded. Sterling froze halfway up, then sat back down. "I didn't bring you here just to give you a check," Vivian said, leaning against the edge of the table. "Ascendia is changing. We are rebranding. We are getting rid of the old culture, the boys' club, the arrogance, the bias. We are rebuilding from the ground up." She looked him dead in the eye. "I fired my director of flight operations this morning." Sterling's eyes widened. That's a big job." "It is," Vivian agreed. "It requires someone who knows how to fly. But more importantly, it requires someone who knows what it feels like to be on the ground. I need someone who can look a captain in the eye and tell him that his stripes don't mean a damn thing if he doesn't respect the people who load his bags, the people who clean his cabin, and the people who pay his salary." She paused. "I need a watchdog, Richard. I need someone who has been broken and put back together properly. I want you to run flight ops." Sterling was stunned. The room seemed to spin. "Me, but Dr. Cross. I'm the man who humiliated you. The video, the hashtag. The video is exactly why you're perfect," Vivian said. "The world saw you fall. Now I want them to see you rise. It's the ultimate PR story, sure, but more than that, I trust you." She leaned in close. "I trust you, because you know exactly what happens when you cross me. And I trust you because when you were standing in the rain with no audience, no glory, and a screaming captain above you, you did the right thing." She extended her hand. "Director Sterling, do we have a deal?" Sterling looked at her hand. It was a lifeline. It was a redemption he hadn't dared to dream of. He stood up. He stood tall. He didn't puff out his chest like the old Captain Sterling. He stood with the quiet strength of a man who had carried the weight. He took her hand. "We have a deal, Dr. Cross." "Good." Vivian said, her grip firm. "Now go get changed. That suit is terrible. And Richard," "Yes, ma'am. Your first task is to give Big Mike a raise. He says you owe him for not writing you up for talking to the dog." Sterling laughed. It was a rusty, ragged sound, but it felt good. "Consider it done." As Richard Sterling walked out of the boardroom, he stopped at the glass doors. He looked back. Vivian was already back at work, reading a new file, The Titan of Industry, once again. He walked to the elevator. When the doors opened, he stepped in. He pressed the button for the lobby, but then he paused. He pressed the button for the basement-level flight operations. He wasn't going home. He had work to do. Below him on the tarmac, the rain was still falling. The bags were still moving. But for the first time in a long time, the man at the top wasn't looking down on them. He was looking out for them. ID Foundation, on which you build a new life. Richard Sterling had to lose his wings to find his humanity. He thought he was the king of the sky, but it took a black woman in Seat 1A, a woman he tried to erase to show him that true leadership isn't about altitude. It's about attitude. Vivian Cross proved that the ultimate power move isn't revenge. It's reconstruction. She didn't just punish a man. She repurposed him. She took a symbol of the old broken system and forged him into the guardian of the new one. In a world where we are quick to cancel and destroy, sometimes the hardest, most radical thing you can do is offer a path to redemption, provided the person is willing to walk through the rain to get there. If you loved this saga of karma, justice, and second chances, please smash that like button. It helps the algorithm find more people who need to hear this story. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that it's never too late to change. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got a lot more stories coming your way. Thanks for watching, and stay humble.